All right, I will go ahead and get us started, but please do continue to drop your name, your organization, where you're joining us from in the chat. Really enjoying seeing all these names and cities and states. I am currently in Indianapolis, but I call Bethesda, Maryland home, so it's great to see everyone from my area and across the nation, around the world. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us during Women's History Month, which, as you all know, is a time that we can reflect on the progress women and girls have made, the work still ahead, and the power of collective action. This year's Women's History Month theme is moving forward together, women educating and inspiring generations. And that feels especially fitting as we explore how philanthropy can drive change for women and girls across generations, across communities, and around the world. So today's conversation is rooted in what WPI research has shown us year after year, that philanthropy has the power to drive lasting change for women and girls, but it remains an underleveraged resource. So I will briefly introduce our panelists here and provide a little bit of table setting introduction before we get into our conversation that I'm so excited about. We have four amazing panelists with us today. We'll have Dr. Nicole Bates, who is Senior Advisor of Strategic Philanthropy and Partnerships at Pivotal Ventures, Kit Muirhead, Partnerships Manager and Gender Lead at Alliance Magazine, Tarika Barrett, CEO of Girls Who Code, and Tara Abrahams, Head of Impact for the Meteor, and also Board Chair for She's the First and the International Center for Research on Women. So in terms of doing a bit of backgrounding, table setting, why, aside from the fact that it's Women's History Month, are we having this event now? Well, WPI conducts a research study every year called the Women and Girls Index, and it tracks giving to thousands of organizations serving women and girls in the United States. Our latest data show that less than 2% of all charitable giving supports these organizations, and that's a figure that's remained really consistent since we launched the Women and Girls Index in 2019. Meanwhile, we also know that women are powerful philanthropic drivers. They give more than similar men, they give differently, and they're often focused on collaboration, community, and getting to the root of issues or systems change. High net worth women and next-gen donors are also increasing forces in philanthropy. They're bringing a growing appetite for gender-lens giving and intersectional impact. And yet, this critical work remains underfunded, and we risk missing a major opportunity to fully invest in solutions that move the needle for women and girls. Digging into the next gen research a little bit, recent research from my colleagues at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy has highlighted that millennials and Gen Z donors are deeply issue-driven. So they're focused on causes like gender equity rather than individual organizations. They see themselves as social change agents. They're expecting things from nonprofits that they support, like hands-on engagement, transparency, and they're also using technology and social media to guide their giving and activism. They're fueling new forms of philanthropy, both familiar to us, like crowdfunding campaigns, and maybe things that are new to us, like charity streaming events led by influencers. And at the same time, we know that there's this historic wealth transfer underway, where an estimated $18 trillion will change hands from older to younger generations by 2048. So the opportunity to engage this next generation and direct significant resources toward gender equity has never been greater. So why does this matter? Well, as some of you may know, research shows that when you invest in women and girls, you unlock ripple effects across communities. You improve health, education, economic opportunity, and leadership pathways. Our own research also shows that giving to women and girls increases during moments of crisis. We saw this during the COVID pandemic and in response to some of the Supreme Court decisions about reproductive rights. So these moments really remind us that philanthropy can and does show up when it matters most. But our challenge is turning those moments into sustained strategic investment. So where we're headed in this conversation today is to discuss how philanthropy has the capacity not just to fund programs, but to shift systems, shape narratives, and open doors for women and girls around the world. Today, we'll look at how funders across generations can move us forward together and ensure that investments in women and girls are not just sustained, but truly transformative. So again, I am so thrilled to welcome our panelists. Thank you. What I'm going to do first is to just go kind of round robin and ask you, first of all, to introduce yourself. I only gave your name and title, so please introduce any other information you think that our audience should know. And then answer the question, what inspired your commitment to gender equity in philanthropy? So Nicole, let's start with you.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really nice to share this space with you for this conversation. I'd love to answer your question first from a personal perspective. I am a woman. I come from a long line of strong women who have set an example for caring for others and having a sense of responsibility for shaping a better future. So thanks to them, I know when a woman stands in her full power, that anything is possible. I also know that full power is not the default for many. And despite women making up half of the population, we are underrepresented in the places where decisions are made, where resources are controlled and allocated, and where policies and perspectives are shaped. So when women are missing from these spaces, important gaps emerge, places like wages, wealth, leadership, the content that we create and the content that we consume, the stories that we tell ourselves and tell each other. And as you said, philanthropy can catalyze change, it can fill gaps, it supports innovation, and it supports innovators. And those are all things that we need to address complex social issues like gender. So I just feel really fortunate to work for an organization as pivotal and be part of this broader philanthropic community that's actually committed to addressing some of the longstanding barriers and reimagining systems that keep women from expressing their full power and influence, which ultimately holds all of us back. So thanks again for creating this space today.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I'll turn it over to you, Kit, to introduce yourself and what inspired your commitment to gender equity.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me today. It's great to be in the room. I'm Kit, I'm from Alliance Magazine. I'm the kind of gender lead there, so we're actually based in London, so hello to everyone from across the pond. So in the grand scheme of things, I'm pretty new to the field of philanthropy still. I've had kind of a longer commitment to gender justice and its many intersections for a while, but I have to be honest, when I first entered the philanthropic industry sector, I was a little bit skeptical. I think I was like, oh, this is just another tool of capitalism for billionaires and blah, blah, blah. But I did get thinking about it, especially with this question today. Based on my kind of previous work, I have a background in tackling and preventing gender-based violence through kind of advocacy and policy. And my first ever job in that sector in Australia, I worked for an organization that was a national organization. We kind of were a network of different women's groups working to end violence. And halfway through my first year there, the Australian government withdrew 100% of our funding. So we lost kind of 12 years worth of networks and the kind of policy change and research that had come with those networks. It all just kind of disappeared. And it was heartbreaking. And I hadn't even worked in that job for a while. So that got me thinking, like, what would have happened if there had have been a thriving gender philanthropy sector in Australia at that time to kind of catch us. And I think it would have been really great. To be honest, I think it would have saved a lot of life and pain. But yeah, and I'm here and I'm in the sector, and I continue to be inspired by feminist funds and women's funds and people in the sector kind of just pushing forward despite the difficulties at the moment. And yeah, it's really inspiring. So very happy to be here as well.
Thanks so much, Kit. Tara, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, everyone. It's lovely to be here to celebrate Women's History Month. Not just the progress that we've made, but where we have yet to go. I'm Tara Abrahams. I'm head of impact at the Meteor, which is a feminist media company using storytelling to advance gender equity and racial justice. And when I was thinking about this question of what inspired me to kind of go down this path of gender equity and philanthropy, it really is at that intersection of storytelling and social change. I was really fortunate to have a lightning bolt moment maybe 15 years ago when I literally stumbled into a conversation about a very small project that would eventually become a really big and bold initiative called Girl Rising, which was a feature-length documentary film and campaign. The film featuring the stories of 9 girls in 9 different countries to elevate the importance of educating girls around the world. And it really was as if I had sort of unlocked this secret world that international development experts had known about for so long, that if you invest in girls, all the things, Jackie, that you mentioned start to happen, right? They get married later, they have fewer children when they want to, they earn more money, their families go on to earn more money, have more education, entire communities and countries can really rise. Besides the fact that, of course, they got to go to school, which is a good thing in and of itself. So that really just became the issue that kept me up at night, frankly, and then got me going to wake up and get out of bed in the morning. And it was because when I really started to work on Girl Rising and I saw those girls on the screen, by virtue of my parents being from India and the Philippines, it really was by a twist of fate that I was sitting where I was and not there on the screen. It was because my parents were able to invest in education and my education. And these issues were very much real for them, not an abstraction, not theoretical. So I just feel very, very fortunate that the work that I get to do in this space allows me to make some small contribution to the world I want my daughters to live in, which, by the way, I also firmly, firmly believe is going to benefit my son as well, because when you invest in women, it benefits everyone. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Tarika, over to you.
Thank you. I am Dr. Tarika Barrett, and I'm the CEO of Girls Who Code. We are an international nonprofit committed to closing the gender gap in tech, and we've been doing this work since 2012 and have reached more than 670,000 students with our programming. And this already is such a rich and wonderful conversation. So thank you so much for having me here today. And, your question is wonderful. And last night I had the good fortune of being with a group of, I think it was about 70 young women who had come for an event that we hosted at Girls Who Code. And I always say that I like to share a little bit about my own story. And my passion for education and for my work at Girls Who Code was built throughout my childhood in both Brooklyn, New York, and Kingston, Jamaica. And, anyone who has lived in another country knows how much it shapes your worldview and how I understand issues of opportunity, issues of class and race, as well as equity. All of that was formed by my upbringing. And I also had a chance to attend an all-girls high school in Kingston. So I understand the power of spaces designed to support and affirm girls and women. And I was very lucky, similar, I think, to another panelist's comment. I grew up with a mom who definitely stood in her power and instilled in me the power of mentorship and the importance of fighting for equity and making change. And she was also the first in our family to go to college and to get a graduate degree. And it still is something that fuels me because her own mother never made it past the 6th grade. And, my family, my mom came to New York City after getting into Hunter College, and she moved to New York City. She was a part of a wave of young, ambitious West Indians, and Tara just talked about how much education can transform. And she found this brighter future. She eventually worked her way through undergrad and grad school at Columbia. And, fast forward, and we talk about intergenerational impact, she ended up being the founder of Jamaica's first ever organization focused on mentoring in the country. And so very much followed in her footsteps. And my journey mirrors that of many of our students. And it definitely propels me to think about how I can open the door wider for others to walk through. And so much of that early shaping and my own journey informs how I, stand in this the position that I'm in now as CEO of Girls Who Code, and so glad to be a part of this conversation. rooted in gender equity because it's so important.
Thank you, Tarika. Thank you all so much for wonderful introductions and setting the stage for our conversation. Nicole, let's go back to you. In your role at Pivotal Ventures, you have kind of been at the forefront of advancing gender equity. Pivotal itself, at least I have seen, is a very nimble organization that's able to adapt and use different strategies as needed. Can you talk a little bit about, in your experience, what strategies have been most effective in actually moving the needle for women and girls?
I'm happy to. First, for those who may not be as familiar with Pivotal, I'll just say a quick word on way of background. First of all, we are a company that was founded by Melinda French Gates, and we work to accelerate the pace of social progress and expand women's power and influence in the US and around the world. And we do that by using a combination of venture investments, philanthropic grant making, advocacy, and most importantly, partnership to get more power into the hands of more people, especially women. Now, gender is a broad topic. It is an indicator of how we are doing in terms of social progress. And so programmatically, we made a strategic decision to focus on the most critically underfunded areas in that space. And we have seen some movement, and I'm happy to share just a couple of examples. The first is in the space of women in tech. So Tarika, very happy to share the screen with you today. And I think you can speak to this better than I can, but I'll share a little bit from our perspective. Now, our Women in Tech strategy recognizes the heavy influence that the tech sector has on society. And women have historically been underrepresented overall in that sector, and certainly in leadership positions, and the follow-on effects of not being as equally represented in those spaces. Now, our strategy has had specific goals to increase the number of women graduating with computer science degrees, with the concept that, you know, you can get folks into the sector and then have other interventions along the way that take them to that leadership trajectory or outcome if that's what they want to seek. Now, through partnership with business and with universities, in 2023, we saw more than 27,000 women graduating with computing degrees, and that was more than double the number of women in 2016. So these things take time, but also things can happen quickly when we really double down on our efforts. I'll give one other quick example, which is our work in the space of women's political power. Here, we're really working to advocate for solutions that break down the barriers for more women to run for office, win elections, and then lead at all levels of government. And again, thanks to a combination of interventions and stakeholders, policy work, advocacy coalitions, we're seeing a record number of women across the aisle now serving in state legislatures across the country. And so in these areas, whether it's tech or politics, whether it's caregiving, partnership is at the heart of what we do. And as we do this work, we want to celebrate progress. This is a great month to celebrate progress for women. And we also have to recognize that it takes time to break down or break through some of those broken systems or outdated structures. So these gains are not guaranteed to stick, and we have to keep that in mind, that to maintain progress, we have to be very intentional and continue to be collective in our effort. And I know we're going to take hopefully another lap around, and I can talk a little bit about how we do some of that work as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Well, Kit, let's go to you through your work at Alliance Magazine. You've had something of a bird's eye, a 30,000-foot view of global philanthropic trends. So in your experience, how have you seen funders thinking about investing in gender equity, and how has that evolved in recent years?
Sure. So you've kind of talked about this a little bit, Jacqueline, with the kind of findings from the research, but we know that less than 2% of global philanthropic funding goes to women and girls. So not very much. And Black feminist movements receive between 0.1% and 0.35% of global philanthropy, so even less. And you can only imagine women with disability and queer women and, you know, all of the different intersections, how much money they're receiving. It's not much. And then, of course, on top of that, we've got the kind of global things happening at the moment with public funding and international aid. So obviously US aid is an example of that, but also these trends are happening across Europe. So in the Netherlands and Germany and UK, for instance, these traditionally big funders of gender equality globally are really kind of taking a step back. And I think that is putting pressure on philanthropy to step up and fill this gap. And we have been seeing this in terms of those kind of big classic actors like Melinda French Gates and Mackenzie Scott. I know Impact have launched a gender fund and but I do think that there need to be new actors stepping into this space to support everything going on. A few other trends. So there is still a real hesitancy. Oh, sorry, I've just gotten a thing saying my internet connection is unstable. Is everyone able to hear me?
Yeah, you're good now.
Great. Sorry about that. So there is still a kind of trend in that there's a hesitancy to fund feminist movements, which I think is quite concerning considering that feminist movements have been responsible for nearly every kind of gender equality achievement throughout history. So I got a little statistic for this. There was a 2012 study of 70 countries over 4 decades that found that grassroots feminist movements were the single most effective force in reducing domestic violence and increasing women's safety. So there is definitely that institutional philanthropy does still seem a little bit scared of funding movements and of being a little bit more explicitly political as well. One other trend is that we have seen a rise in kind of collaborative funds and feminist funds. So those intermediaries that kind of work in between feminist actors and women's organizations and bigger funders. So we think about the Black Feminist Fund, Phenomenal Funds, Mama Cash, the Equality Fund, We Are Purposeful. And in the global majority world or the global South, I think in the last 20 years, there's been 175 new collaborative funds have emerged. So there has been a really big growth, and these guys play a really critical role in kind of relieving the burden of women's organizations from having to look for that funding so that they can focus on their actual frontline, but also for more institutional philanthropy. And they're also just great advocates of kind of gender transformative giving and feminist philanthropy principles. So big fan of those guys. And I think just one kind of last trend I thought it would be interesting to mention, please do stop me if I'm talking too much, is that there's been this big emphasis on localization and giving to local communities globally, which is great because kind of it is recognizing that the best expertise, that local communities have the best expertise of the issues facing women and girls. But there has also been a trend that's meant that funders often exclusively fund according to geographical priorities, which can be a little bit limiting when you're funding women and girls because the groups do move. They move across borders due to military occupation or to escape persecution, family violence, or to seek economic opportunities. So I was recently in Bangkok, and an activist who had received funding to support Myanmar women was saying how the funding was, they were really struggling because Myanmar women during the coup had moved into Thailand, but that funding was geographically set for Myanmar. So it was really difficult to get that money to the women who had migrated to Thailand. So it's getting hard to do this kind of cross-border funding in terms of, you look at Eastern Europe and Central Asia and the kind of foreign agent laws in Georgia that make it really difficult for people to register as an NGO and make it difficult to kind of send that money across borders. But there are feminist and women's funds doing really great work in looking for backdoor infrastructure, looking for the cross-border networks that already exist, funding the diaspora. So for instance, in Palestine, if you can't get money into Palestine, looking at what Palestinian activists exist in the UK who can push the UK government to do more. So yeah, there's a lot happening. I guess to sum it up, there's the funding commitments need to be greater, and there needs to be kind of it's getting harder to fund certain regions, but there's also this growth of the collaborative funds and more creative and innovative ways of funding women and girls, which is exciting, something positive.
Thank you so much. That was a really great recap, and especially as someone whose work is, ideally global, but realistically very U.S. centered. Really appreciate the global perspective and perspective of things that are going on in other places that affect women and girls around the world. Tarika, I'm going to come to you here. I know Nicole mentioned women in tech, but Girls Who Code, we all know, well, most of us should know, has been a leader in expanding access to STEM education for women and girls. So would love to hear from your experience how philanthropy in particular can play a role in closing the gender gap in tech and in other underrepresented fields.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jacqueline. And honestly, Nicole's answer was just phenomenal in her round, because Pivotal has been a partner and sponsor of Girls Who Code's work. And, you know, we share this passion for understanding what can change when we empower women and girls and non-binary folks to be a part of tech. This thing that has this outsized impact on all of our lives. And part of what I think has made us successful as an organization and where philanthropy can play a role is that Girls Who Code has always been about filling the gaps where girls tend to drop out of the STEM pipeline. And we know that it's more than just tech. It always has been. It's about confidence, it's access, it's more. And, you know, there are a couple of points that I think, you know, folks should be aware of as they think about this. But in terms of the tech pipeline, there's this middle school cliff, right? When girls somewhere between the ages of 13 and 17 start to lose confidence in their ability to pursue technical skills. And then another powerful drop off point is in high school, when young people are deciding what do they want to pursue in college, and are they going to pursue STEM? It may feel, you know, daunting or completely out of reach. And then we have another critical drop off point, which is in college. And this is where Pivotal's support was instrumental. We were able to launch our Girls Who Code college loops, and we have more than 300 of those across the country. And this is where, you know, our young women need immense persistence and strong support systems to actually graduate with a degree in the field, because that percentage, so folks know, is only 20% in terms of women in computer science. And that's why we have to meet our students at every single one of these high risk points and turning points in their tech journey. And that's how we design our programs. And they range from programs that start in the third grade that spark interest. And then high school programs where we pull the curtain back and allow young people to see what's actually like a career in tech could look like. And then, you know, one of the things we did in response to pandemic, for example, when internships and jobs were disappearing, is that we brought career programming to market. And the event I mentioned that I went to last night was a meet and greet of all these young women with one of our corporate partners. And it ends up being such a game-changing experience to talk and see another woman in tech who's doing the work you want to do someday. And, you know, all of our programs, of course, teach, you know, computer science skills, but it's also about collaboration, the problem solving, the sisterhood, which obviously is a core value for us, and most importantly, persistence. So that's a huge piece of it. But I think the thing, you know, we just launched a, you know, new strategic plan called 5x5 with this bold new vision to reach 5 million girls, women, and non-binary individuals over the next 5 years. And this work, Jacqueline, just feels urgent. If you really think about what we're seeing right now, women hold only 22% of AI roles right now. And we also have research that tells us that women are using AI tools less frequently than men. And here's this, you know, we're at this moment where we're seeing this seismic shift in tech, and we're at risk of having half our population left behind and spending so much in the way of resources and dollars to bring them to where they need to be. And the other piece of it that I want to share is that this is a moment also where our young people are looking at tech. They're looking around and saying, what does tech look welcoming to me? Does it seem like a space that I want to work in? Does this align with, you know, my values? Because time and time again, we see that our young people are very excited about tech, emerging tech, but it exists at the intersection of their passions. It could be, you know, AI and music or fashion, AI and healthcare, AI and finance, but it's always very often rooted in intersectionality. And so a fear that fuels me every day to do more and more and meet our students' needs is that I don't want to see this cliff where we've invested so much. We've reached basically 700,000 students. We've changed the image of what a technologist looks like. And then we have this moment, right? This historical chapter where we're trying to make sure that girls and women aren't turned off. So I'm so glad we're having this conversation. I'm so glad that we share this deep commitment to making sure that we have, you know, more equitable spaces and opportunities for young women and girls.
Thank you so much. I feel like I hate this metaphor, but I feel like I'm drinking from a fire hose with all of you, sharing such great content. And what really struck me, Tarika, was the idea that, you know, it's going to cost a lot more in terms of resources, time, and effort to catch up, as opposed to taking advantage of this moment when we can kind of look ahead and see these disparities happening in real time and addressing them in real time. So really appreciate those comments. Tara, let's go to you. You work at you donate your time, your effort to apparently a bunch of organizations that are at the intersection of philanthropy, media, advocacy, and would love to know from your experiences kind of across the board, what lessons have you learned from engaging donors in the area of supporting women's and girls' causes?
Sure, absolutely. And can I just repeat again how much of an honor it is to be on this panel? I'm just learning already so much. So just wanted to note that as we go through this incredible conversation. So in terms of thinking about this intersection, philanthropy, media, advocacy, one lesson I wanted to share is that storytelling really matters. Stories matter. The human stories of these different organizations, these issues. I think about how we all opened up with our introductions, and it was really about personal storytelling to illustrate our commitment to a larger set of issues. And that's really the work that I do every day at the Meteor. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, we partnered with a woman named Amanda Zarowski, whose name may be familiar to many of you. At the time, we met her through a group of doctors who had connected with her because she had just found herself in the horrific situation of having been pregnant in Texas. Her pregnancy was in danger. She found herself about to miscarry and was not able to access the care that she needed until she almost died by virtue of sepsis. And so she just had this kind of harrowing, horrific experience that we were able to tell her story through our platform at the Meteor, but also in partnership with People Magazine, which ended up, helping her story reach people who might have been experiencing the same thing given the current status of reproductive rights in our country. Amanda became an advocate. She spoke out about her experiences with her community and far beyond, and eventually joined a group of other Texas women in the Center for Reproductive Rights to sue the state of Texas because of her experience and not being able to access the health care that she needed. Ultimately, she became a nationally renowned figure in the reproductive rights movement. Her experiences were further chronicled in a documentary film. Attorneys general around the country pointed to Amanda's story and others like hers as a way of advocating for the preservation of women's reproductive rights in the aftermath of the Dobbs decision. And really, it happened honestly because philanthropy came in to help support our work at the Meteor to tell the kinds of stories that need to be told right now, not just about reproductive rights, but about a range of issues related to women's rights more broadly, which are being attacked in this country and all over the world. Stories can help us do that, right? They can help us elevate what is the human cost of something like an abortion ban, or can help us reduce stigma around women and non-binary people who are accessing this form of healthcare. And it really came about because philanthropy was taking bold action on an issue, took a risk where others might have shied away, and were really investing in shifting the narrative in such a way that it set off a chain reaction of impact that really did move the conversation on reproductive rights in this country. And that's a really, I think, powerful example of how philanthropy can step in to help us tell a different story about women's rights in this country and globally. Particularly as a way to combat the rise of the anti-rights movement and agenda, which has taken hold in far too many countries around the world. And it's interesting, Tarika, when you were talking about that cliff that girls and women experience in the tech sector, I was reminded of something that I just read about in my LinkedIn perusing, which was a study that I believe was put out by McKinsey around what are the things that women can do in order to be successful and continue to advance and elevate themselves in the corporate sector. Which I think is powerful and a great sort of narrative tactic to take. I'd love to see us also talk about what the workplace itself can do to help support women to remain in a private sector environment, in a corporate environment, to advance, et cetera. If only that the conversation between those narratives help us get to where we all, I do believe, want to go faster. So I do think this, the ability of philanthropy to take risks and to step in, to create and experiment with narrative change, it's certainly really powerful to us at the Meteor. But I think also for you at Girls Who Code, Tarika, for others of us who are on nonprofit boards, who are perhaps leading our families' efforts on philanthropy, these stories are important. They need to be told, and they can move people. They can move philanthropy to think about their strategies and their tactics in different ways.
That is really helpful. Thank you so much, Tara. And just for the audience, we will try to do a little bit of Q&A if we have time toward the end of our hour. So I've gotten a couple of questions in the chat. Please go ahead and put those in the chat, and I will raise those for our panelists as we can. And just, Nicole, let me go back to you. You said, let's go back to the how. So how can funders strategically engage across generations to ensure sustained investment in gender equity? And what role do you are connected to one very high net worth donor, but what role can these high net worth donors and then also next gen givers in terms of those who are inheriting this wealth transfer play in this shift?
It's a great question, Jackie. And I have to say, I'm just loving this panel that I'm on, and I want to hear from them more than myself. So I'm going to try to make it quick without speaking too quickly. I'll just start here stating what you actually mentioned at the top. Philanthropy is evolving so rapidly. We have this multi-trillion-dollar transfer of wealth. We have women coming into that wealth. We have more women making more money, and we have more women managing money. We have people overall coming into their wealth sooner and not waiting to spend it charitably. And as mentioned in your recent report, particularly younger generations have interest in different issues. They engage with issues and organizations differently, and they actually expect a different experience. The fact that there are more philanthropists across generations that are taking a more active and more collaborative posture actually gives me a lot of hope that we can more quickly move money off of the sidelines, because there's a lot there into the spaces that need it most. Now, I recognize that the recent WPI report talked about next gen, and I actually just want to stretch that term out into its completion so that we, and I think the report is fantastic. And I'm just speaking about the space in between, like the family elder and then the millennial or the Gen Z, and we can talk later about why we always ignore Gen X. There's an entire cohort of emerging philanthropists, people earlier on their philanthropic journey, or who are newer to gender as a topic, regardless of the generation. And these are the givers that we've seen are ripe for shared learning and collaboration and partnership with those who are already established. And to answer your question directly, I think that's what some established philanthropists, high net worth individuals can do. They can model, they can convene, they can do something like Match, which is something that we did. So about 2 years ago, we worked with 3 donor networks, national donor networks. And they actually did all of the heavy lifting to incentivize their members to give toward programs benefiting women and girls. And in less than 12 months, we saw more than 69 donors activated, $43 million unlocked, and 140 nonprofits supported, many of them brand new to us that we wouldn't have known otherwise. And the beauty of this story is that it's actually growing the community and the ecosystem of givers and exposing all of us to parts of the solution set that we wouldn't otherwise know. So to me, that just kind of highlights the importance, again, regardless of which generation you sit in or what angle you're approaching gender from, the importance of personal connection to the issue, going on that journey with the organization and being in community with others who actually share your vision and values. That is such an important way to build support for the issues and confidence among givers over time, because philanthropy done well, it takes a long time and there are lots of kind of twists and turns along the way. So hopefully that illustrates a little bit of what we can do as individuals who care about these issues, but also importantly, what we can do together.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Kit, I'm going to bring it back to you. Tara mentioned storytelling in her remarks. And we know that storytelling and media can play a huge role in mobilizing philanthropy for women and girls. We've heard, a few examples today, but how, in your experience, can funders best use narrative change as a tool for impact?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, thank you, Tara, for that kind of amazing overview. I do think that there is a lot, like in philanthropy media, I think that we do kind of focus on what the problem with the philanthropic sector is a lot of the time, but there is a real strength in pointing out kind of examples of how to do things better as well. So we've had a few kind of examples of that where we've, what you were saying, Tara, about sharing impact, sharing success stories, sharing tactics, mainstreaming certain approaches to make them seem less scary, to show that people have done them before. But we also have found that so far with our kind of gender portal, we've had some ability to kind of connect grassroots feminist activists and organizers with funders. So for our International Women's Day coverage, we had a Ukrainian feminist activist writing a piece, and we had a funder reach out to us and say, hi, can we be connected to this person when we're going to Ukraine? So that's kind of that tangible impact of how storytelling can really drive impact. The second part, so how funders can use narrative change as a tool for impact, is a big question, but I really like it. I think the first thing to think about is that narrative change often seems like a really abstract idea to funders, but it's actually like a really key part of social change. Narratives shape our social norms and our values, and then go on to have really tangible impacts on people's lives through policy or law or whatever. I personally don't think it's super possible for us to separate narrative change from social movements, particularly when we're talking about gender inequality. Social movements both produce and are produced by narratives, but they are also often the vehicle through which narratives can be turned into tangible social change. So you think about the Me Too movement and how that changed cultural narratives around sexual harassment. But then you also think right now about the anti-gender movements and the anti-rights movements, which are very global and very well funded, and how they're strategically using narratives to regress gender equality and rights for LGBTQI people and various bad things. So I've got kind of three key points for funders when thinking about narrative change. I'll try and be very quick. But the first one is, when you're funding narrative change, it's important to fund processes rather than projects. So that's that piece around having that flexible, that long-term funding. It takes years for a narrative change to sink in and for social norms and values to be challenged. And so funding a one-off project with a limited funding timeframe is not going to have the same impact as funding long-term and flexible funding that allows people to build those dynamic and impactful and inclusive narratives. We're also coming against rapidly shifting contexts. So rigidly designed projects might not be relevant anymore once the funding has actually reached the bank accounts of people who are making that narrative change. So the multi-year and flexible funding allows women's organizations and feminist movements to kind of move beyond that fight or flight stage into building kind of strategic and creative narratives that allows them, when there is a critical juncture that happens, to be able to kind of jump on that and change values and change norms. And it also gives them a cushion to, to try new things. And if that doesn't work out, to be able to be like, okay, well, that approach to narrative change didn't work out, but what can we take forward from those learnings? The next point I would say to funders when looking at narrative change is to think beyond thematic funding and to fund a diversity of actors. So funding just one organization working on a campaign for women's rights isn't really going to be enough. I think we'd all be aware of the Audre Lorde quote that says that there's no such thing as a single issue struggle, because none of us live single issue lives. So funders need to think intersectionality, think intersectionally. So how can strong collective narratives be built between the shared struggles of women and queer groups and racialized groups, migrants, climate activists, Indigenous communities? and how can you invest in a diverse array of actors? So those big international organizations, but also the local grassroots communities who are best positioned to come up with solutions and narratives that are both culturally appropriate and context specific, and also grounded in people's lived experience. And I think funding a diversity of actors, both in social movements pushing for change, also kind of reduces risk for funders while supporting that kind of broader ecosystem of the social movement and for gender equality. And the last point I would say in terms of looking at narrative change is, again, linking it back to social movements, and that connection there is about protecting and supporting activists. So right now, with the anti-gender movements and the anti-rights movements, activists and women's organizations are facing severe threats. So physical violence and criminalization, digital surveillance and harassment all around the world. So I think funders need to get comfortable funding things like security training, digital safety, collective well-being initiatives, and even legal fees for feminist activists and women who are at the forefront of challenging narratives. So yeah, I think the key takeaways: flexible long-term funding is always a good one. Intersectional kind of approaches and engaging diverse actors, supporting activists.
Great. Thank you so much, Kit. Really appreciate all of those suggestions for funders. Tarika, I'd love to move to you. When you were talking before, you mentioned philanthropy as important for filling gaps and avoiding cliffs when girls kind of fall off or out of the tech space. But we also know that inspiring the next generation of women leaders requires more than just access. So representation, mentorship, community. What, in your experience, have you seen are the most effective strategies for ensuring that young women not only enter these male-dominated industries, but actually settle into them, thrive, and kind of work to change them from within?
Yeah, great question. And I know I'm looking at time. I'm going to go quickly. I know all of us say that, and then we have like 4 more points. Okay, so we're constantly thinking about how to make sure our students have the skills and qualities they need to be leaders, because I think it's that leadership piece that ends up being a huge differentiator and feeling as though they have every right to have a seat at the table. And we have wonderful stories of students who are taking control of their own careers, they're starting their own companies, creating their own products, and frankly, shaping the kind of work culture they want to see. But I think that when, we ask these questions about how they're going to be successful, what we need to do to prepare them to thrive in this male-dominated industry or the workforce overall, I think, to Tara's earlier point, the narrative has to shift. We know that 50% of women in tech end up leaving by the age of 35, many of them citing the same things that we're struggling with, either a toxic work environment or not seeing women in the ranks of leadership. But, I think that it has to be a conversation, to Tara's earlier point, that goes to the companies. How do we get them to begin to think about what it looks like to embrace a whole new generation of workers who bring the bravery and the resilience and skills that don't show up in conventional credentials to the table? And so much of this is also looking at their own practice and thinking about how they need to operate differently. We did a study with Accenture and found that if we could make our workplaces more inclusive, we could increase the number of women in tech by 3 million. So it just goes to show you that there's so much that can be done. And I think there are things like hiring and recruitment practices, creating an ecosystem of support, thinking about actual trajectories for young people, not just hiring them and saying, okay, we've done this, they're here, they have an entry-level role, but where is that young person in several years? So part of what I talk a lot about is making sure that these environments are actually welcoming to our young people once they get there, because they certainly have the goods, they have the talent, they've proven that. So, how do we really shift the conversation to the companies?
Thank you so much. Tara, I'm going to ask you one last question before we dig into maybe just a couple things from the Q&A for those of you who are interested in, feel like you have something to say about them. So Tara, from your work in philanthropy and advocacy, we've mentioned kind of the generational shift and generational differences in philanthropic activity. From your work, how have you seen different generations of donors approaching funding for gender equity? And also, really easy, quick question, but are there best practices that you have seen or used for bridging generational perspectives to allow for long-term impact?
It's an interesting question. I'll take maybe the second part first and try to be brief. I mean, I think it is a conversation. I've always been one to believe in multi-directional mentorship, and that all of the generations, and by the way, plus 1,000, Nicole, to including Gen X in this part of the conversation, as well as a representative of that particular generation. But I do think that mentorship and learning go in so many different directions. The generations that have come before have charted a different path, certainly, than the current generations who are facing the realities of the world that they and their young children will grow up in. But there needs to be mutual respect, and collaboration, I think, is one of the best practices that I would point to. Because what I'm really seeing is not necessarily differences in how the generations are approaching issues and tactics around their giving, but really more of a continuum, with the next generation picking up the conversation where previous generations have made advances and trying to go perhaps farther, faster. I was actually just at a donor briefing last week with a group of families who are collectively trying to make a big bet in women's health, focused on issues such as sexual and reproductive health and rights, maternal mortality, and Kit, an issue in an area close to your heart and experience, gender-based violence. And it was fascinating because as we were, the three of us, on the panel talking about our respective areas of focus and expertise, one of the younger generation raised her hand and really, in her comment, kind of gave a textbook definition of trust-based philanthropy. She said something to the effect of, you three are experts, and we should just be really trusting you with our dollars, and knowing that by virtue of the data that you're seeing in women's health, you're going to make sound and effective decisions with our philanthropic dollars. And then a member of the same generation, just different family, raised her hand and said, what about accountability, right? What are the ways that we can make sure that even as we create trust with our partners in the philanthropic sector, that we also have a sense of accountability, and we know that we are meeting certain milestones on our journey to actually have impact in the world, which I give her, both of them actually do credit. And it's not to say that it might sound as though I'm saying that they are having the same conversation that their parents have had, but I actually do think it is to their credit that they are very quickly jumping into the same issues that I think philanthropy grapples with and needs to understand in order to be more effective with their giving. So what I really hope for philanthropy as it ushers in this new generation of donors and looks ahead to this incredible opportunity of the wealth transfer is that we can all learn from one another and perhaps move smarter and faster and farther to identify the solutions that are already out there, whether that's investing in the capacity of girls' rights organizations like She's the First, or supporting the movement that Tarika is building with Girls Who Code. That it is really a collaborative conversation, and that we need to do it together.
Thank you so much. Before I close, I think we have time for one or maybe two questions, depending on how many of you have something to say about it. One question that really struck me was from a man in the audience who said, how can I essentially be a good male ally without kind of performative symbolic gestures, pink washing, this kind of fake allyship that doesn't necessarily accomplish anything? What would you say to both the men who are the very few men who are in the audience today, but also, to the rest of us to kind of push the men in our lives to be better allies? And that is for anyone to unmute if you have something to say about it.
I'm happy to jump. Yeah, I'm happy to start. And, we love male allies and are grateful for genuine advocacy. I think in a moment like this, where, everyone has talked about the complexity of the philanthropic landscape and what women and girls issues are facing in terms of support. I can speak to that directly because the landscape is really challenging right now. And we have this incredible track record of impact, and yet find ourselves at a moment where it is hard to grasp how different the landscape seems in terms of supporting our work moving forward. And we know that issues of gender equity are certainly not solved. We didn't wake up and decide that they were no longer urgent. They feel even more urgent. So as a male ally, especially if you're a decider, please help make these decisions that allow women and girls to be beneficiaries, but also be able to step into roles as change makers, founders, leaders. There's so much space that we can create for women and girls if we're very, very intentional. And so that allyship can mean, if you're not the decider, speak to folks who are, and who are making critical decisions that impact the incredible work that's being discussed today. And certainly all the folks who aren't on this panel who are doing work that's really incredible. We need your support. We risk losing momentum, and we have to be relentless. So we're really grateful.
Thank you so much. Just in closing, I know we are extremely short on time, but would love to hear from our 4 panelists. One thing that you wish our audience would take away from today, whether it's a phrase, a word, one next step that they can take toward gender equity. So please share with us what you would like our audience to take away. Whoever is ready can unmute. Go ahead, Tara.
I'll come off mute. I'm really just plus wanting, Kit, which is fund women's movements. Let's bust this 2% statistic out of the water. We've been hearing about it for a long, long time. And we have an opportunity at this moment to do it through funding women's movements around the world.
Thank you.
I'll continue the math theme here, at least the numbers theme, and just say 1 + 1 = 3. As we are working, do not wait, get off the sidelines, find someone who may not be a direct bullseye, but maybe an overlap, maybe just a complement. But it's when we put our collective effort forward, that's when we're going to see the shifts and the change.
Thanks, Nicole.
I can jump in. Oh no, Kit, you were going to go. You want to go?
You go.
No, okay. Supporting women and girls isn't just about fairness. It's about innovation. It's about economic growth. It's about solving the world's biggest challenges. We are better, faster, stronger, more thoughtful, and can achieve more when we do this. So please remember that it's more than just about notions of diversity, equity, inclusion, or fairness. Kit.
Thank you. Those are all such great takeaways. I would say that the gender philanthropy sector needs to get organized and learn from community organizers in that. Recognize that in the same way that we need a movement for gender justice, we also need a movement for resource justice that is interlinked with that. To kind of work in solidarity at the forefront of our minds rather than charity. Think about what kind of organizers we can get in contact with. That might be the Mackenzie Scotts, that might be someone else, and use those guys' influence to unlock new pots of money and to kind of champion gender transformative giving approaches. But let's all get into a room and do some power mapping and work it out.
All right, thank you all. Thanks so much to our panelists. And thank you to the 90 of you that stuck with us fully through the end of the hour. Really appreciate you all attending. All of our registrants will receive a link to the recording of this video, of this webinar, and just want to express my gratitude to the 4 of you for joining me. Thank you so much, everyone. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.